Ideas of God in Black Christianity. This is the discussions and topics covered for the class October 7th, 2020 of the Transcendence class. I did not get it recorded because my camera was not working, and then I forgot to record it. So I'm going to give you some of the flavor of the conversations we had and what the topics were so that you can follow up on them, get a sense of what we found is important to talk about today. Present for the class were Tyree, Gary, Kia, and Paulette. So we talked a little bit about the spirituals that I suggested you look into on Monday. Paulette mentioned the one that I hadn't heard of, Go Down on Hannah, and which is a code for the sun going down and please don't come up, I can't stand another day like this. The spirituals were coded to be able to encourage the black folks who were enslaved and having a hard time. Sometimes it enabled them for escape. Sometimes it's just a matter of survival. A lot of them were call and response, a musical technique that is carried over from Africa and is found in a great deal of blues and jazz today. Then we talked about specifically what ideas of God are unique to Christianity in Black America these days. The main one that got brought up, of course, that Kelly Brown Douglas talked about extensively is God is free. God is not limited by doctrines and opinions, prejudices of white America or anybody else. God is so far and so free and completely God's own self. Then that suggests also that God made everyone in God's own image, and each person is good. Not that some people are better than others, some people whose skin color are less than others. No, God's freedom and God's creative power that created each person means that each person is unique and beloved and worthy of care and love themselves. That was an important piece of remembering that God intends for God's people to live their lives fully and completely and as freely as possible. The question came up about issues of heaven and hell and what beliefs that's a very common belief in Black Christianity today, supported to some extent in the Bible, not completely, that God punishes those who sin, that God seeks people who have not a blemish upon them, that it is apparently a way of God's calling people to account for their lives. That was a contradiction in that, because the Bible also talks about Jesus' saving grace, which means that if you put your faith in trust in Jesus, your sins are forgiven. And therefore, you're not held accountable for those sins of the past. You can move into your future with confidence. There's lots of things to think about when we're thinking about ideas of God, and they're very complex. I raised the question about whether the ideas of heaven and hell as eternal reward or punishment are unique to or fit nicely with Black Christianity, or are those pieces of European Christianity that have been imported into Black Christianity and have been sustained after that. There a lot of doctrines about God from white Christianity were just taken whole into black Christianity, and maybe it's time to think about some of those things. The question of heaven and hell, very big in African American history and religion. I had a conversation with Dr. Brogdon about that, who said many pastors are beginning to wonder about various things that we have always believed in black churches, but maybe a carryover of white religion that we need to think about very carefully. And then heaven and hell are one of those. Uh, he noted that black folks are very reluctant to give up the idea of hell because they want to be sure those who are making their lives hell now get their punishment in hell in the afterlife. Interesting questions about what is and what isn't authentic Christianity. All these ideas of God play out in our understanding of our Christian faith as white folks or black folks. I raised the question about one of the two implications of the freedom of God and ideas of God in black religion. One is that is every person was created, as somebody said, in the image of God. Each person is unique and special and beloved of God and worthy of complete freedom and responsibility and to live their lives. How do you live that life out? You got to find what is you, what is truly you in relationship with your God. Try to be as faithful to that relationship with God and to other people and to yourself as you can. And the word that I use for that is integrity. I got a lot of that idea from Howard Thurman, who the 20th century and prophet, black mystic and prophet. I studied with him a little for part of a semester in my seminary years way back when. And he says that given all of the societal pressures and persecution and disinheritedness of black folks, the one thing they have to hold on to that keeps their life worth living is their personal integrity. The ability to say, this is what I am called to do. This is who I am as a child of God. I am not beholden to the opinions and thoughts of somebody else. I have to be true to who I am. And it has to do with deception. It has to do with my faith. It has to do with how I deal with resisting the powers that be. It's a real strong distinction in that between the general life approach of white folks who spend a lot of time worrying about what people think about us, what other white folks think about me. I think I have to be liked. I grew up with this. I have to be liked. I have to be appreciated. I have to be loved. I need those things in order for me to feel okay. And Thurman points out that black folks can't afford to do that. They're going to get messages all the time that they are not worthy, that they are not loved, they are less. The answer to that, he says, is to insist on and persist in keeping their own integrity intact. Be yourself. The famous quote about this comes from Ray Charles in the documentary about the life of Quincy Jones. And Jones and Ray Charles are having a conversation recorded, and Ray Charles is saying, there's not one drop of my self-worth that depends on your opinion of me. That's a piece of black integrity, and that flows directly from the ideas of God's freedom and God's creative ability to create everybody as equal. Paulette noted that's a piece of. Now another connection of the ideas of God and God being free has to do with who are God's favorite people, who in the Bible did God favor, who now is God privileging, preferring, who are the chosen people of God. That's particularly poignant because the myth of the white folks who came to America, that they were and are the chosen people of God, and they have an absolute right to this land and its resources and its people. That's not what the Bible says. The story of the Exodus was about who does God look out for. They're the Israelites, the people of Israel, who we now call the Jews, were moved to Egypt at a time of famine. They were immigrants. They eventually fell into being enslaved by the Egyptians because they were different. And many years of that, 400 years, they were enslaved. And then God heard their cries for help, sent Moses, and they were liberated, freed, sent away from Egypt as free people. That's a story of liberation, of freeing, of God intending people to be free. Now, Kelly Brown Douglas points out that that's not because God liked the Jewish people better than anybody else. They were chosen because they were oppressed. They were slaves. They were the disinherited of the earth at that point, one of those groups. And God pulls at those people to free them, to make sure people can become and be free. Then the second, so the whole business of God's chosen people and God's choosing the oppressed, not necessarily because they're better than anybody else, because they need more of what God has to give. The second implication for life that flows out of this idea of God's being free and being a liberator is the notion that it's not only okay, but it is expected that people will take action to stand up and say, this oppression is wrong, this injustice is not right, we want change, and here's what we want, and here's when we want it. That is what Kelly Brown Douglas calls the encouragement to resist. This is playing out right now in the streets of Louisville the last few months, when people are rising up to demonstrate that they want change so that the strictures of poverty and segregation and bad schools and poor health care and unemployment and redlining that have prevented generational wealth to build up in the black community. All of these people, and then the laws that give the police force the absolute immunity to take black lives just because they feel threatened. All of that is a part of the oppression that people are now standing up and saying, no, this isn't right. It must be changed. And the people in charge of the city have been saying, oh, no, you can't. You can't walk through the streets. Those aren't your streets. Those are our streets. They're saying, no, you don't have a right to stand up and protest and shout and say that the way things are is wrong. That hurts our feelings. You can't do that. So they gas people. They shoot rubber bullets at people. They set up barricades and come in riot armor gear and military vehicles to say that you're not right to stand up and protest. The black faith suggests God is the God who liberates, and God expects you to do your part, not sit passively by and wait for God to liberate us, but to do what we can do to make a change now. Many changes have been made in the past, but we're not done with it. They're saying we got to keep moving. There is a paradox. And the last thing I want to talk about is the paradox of the black faith. And that paradox is that we believe firmly that God is a liberator. God will free us. God does free us. And we're not free. We're still oppressed. We're still living under the thumb of white supremacy. We're still struggling with poverty and health and education and employment and insurance and ability to buy and keep houses and so forth. Our lives are taken easily. We still have all those things. Kelly Brown Douglas, in an article I just read yesterday in the current magazine Christian Century, says she questions the Christian faith constantly, and she continues growing and learning. But she's continues to be pushed partly by questions like the ones her son gives her. She has a 27-year-old son. She refers to him later in the book, in the Stand Your Ground book, by the way. He was a teenager at the time she was writing that. But he says to her, how do we really know that God cares when black people are still getting killed? How long do we have to wait for the justice of God? He says, I get it. Christ is black, but that doesn't seem to be helping us right now. The paradox. We believe God liberates. We're not liberated. How do we deal with that? And Paulette said it very eloquently. That means we just got to keep working, keep growing, keep resisting, keep standing up and demanding that things need to be better in this country than they are now. We've made some progress. Time to make some more. All of these connections and ideas of God flow into a particular life that has nourished and replenished the black folks in this country for all these years. Black communities are central to the community, to the civic life of a community, of a city, of a town, of any rural area. It is important that black church continue, and it is important that black church continue to be creative and grow and thrive in new ways to address the new issues and concerns that are there facing us. So some reminders of what's next. Next week, we will take up just the opposite, white Christianity, or as I sometimes call it, white Anglo-Saxon Christianity, based on Kelly Brown Douglas's book. You are expected to read the first chapter of Stand Your Ground, called America's Exceptionalism, which is another way of talking about white supremacy or racism or just whiteness. I will give you a video on Monday that gives you some of the basic ideas and background of how to frame that, and then ask you some questions, and then we'll have a conversation about white Christianity on Wednesday, as usual. I'm also finishing up a paper, a several-page paper, that I want you to read in addition to the Kelly Brown Douglas, titled The Historical Sources of White Supremacy. And I lay out some of the early Christian, Middle Ages Christian, and even more recent Christian ideas and concepts that have been built into the religious consciousness of America and white America. And it's helpful to understand how racism, structural and philosophical racism, have crept into so many areas of American life. It's embedded in American life. We need to see what ideas of God are there and be able to say what we appreciate and also see what we find to be critical. You have by the way, you do have an assignment of a one-page report on your reading for this week about ideas of God in the Black church. Be sure to look at that Monday video as well as this one. And then I need to say one other class-related thing. That is, don't forget we have a term paper that's due a little less than a month from now. If you have not checked your topic with me, which is what the idea was, to choose a world religion not your own that you can study, find out about, write a 5-page paper, work on your writing, and make sure your writing is done well. Check with me about your topic before you start working on it. And the announcement from the college that the 16th of October is the last day to withdraw or drop a class. If you're thinking this about getting out from under this class without any penalty or any class, this would be your deadline to get that done. You can talk to the registrar, Ms. Thomas, about that whenever you need to. Let me know if you. I'll look forward to your papers on Black Christianity this weekend, and I will see you next week on Wednesday. Thank you.